Welcome to The Real Dope, a podcast for anyone walking alongside someone battling addiction, based on the powerful book, The Real Dope on Dealing with an Addict, by sisters Elizabeth Brand and Meridith Elliott Powell. Each episode will explore practical strategies, share authentic stories, and provide the honest guidance. Let's begin today's journey and turn survival into strength.
Hey, this is Meridith Elliott Powell, and I'm hanging out here with my sister, Beth Brand, and welcome to the Real Dope podcast. How did you get here? We got a powerhouse show today, one of our favorite topics. In fact, we were hanging out so much in the green room, we barely remembered to hit record and get started. I always like to remind you, we are not therapists. Nope, we are just two sisters who have lived the life that many of you are living and have gone through. So today we're going to dive into the subject of boundaries. I mean, I think that is one of the most utilized words in the world of addiction, and probably the one that is most misunderstood. Would you not agree?
Yeah, I would agree. I think too, it's like part of just the and I'm not against psychological speech, but there's a lot of psychological speech just in our normal interactions these days, and boundaries is one of those words that just people use all the time, like being gaslit and boundaries, and without really having a background in knowing what it is and how to use it. I also think it really fits, like last week what we did was we talked about changing the question from do they have a problem to do I have a problem? And now that we've changed that question, so what do we do about it? And the place that we can start is like setting boundaries in our life. Basically saying what do we want and what we don't want.
What exactly is a boundary? I feel like we need to start there.
Well, to me, it is asking yourself, what do I want? And what do I not want in my life? And drawing a line around there. And as you know, and I know, those boundaries evolve and change. They're never like written in stone, because as you grow and you are better able to set the boundary and keep the boundary and understand the boundary. But at first that's really hard. I think about you renting Doug an apartment.
Yeah.
Like you might want to talk about how that was a boundary, like that you didn't want him in the house. That was a boundary, but you couldn't stand him on the street either. So
yeah, I think one of the most important things I think about boundaries, I mean, I remember going to Al-Anon and they kept talking about boundaries, and I never really felt like anybody was defining the word. And then the second thing I felt was that boundaries had to be the same for everybody. And I remember two of my girlfriends arguing over who had the worst husband. And one person's husband cheated on her, and the other one husband didn't have a job. And I remember thinking to myself, like a light bulb going off, and I thought, wow, everybody's allowed to get into a relationship and do what works for them, right? Like if your husband makes a lot of money and he cheats on you and that's okay with you, that's your boundary, right? And if you want to have a significant other who doesn't work and you have a way happy marriage and whatever works for you, like there isn't, it isn't a right or wrong. So that to me was the first thing. The second thing to me was the most helpful when I finally figured it out, and I really feel like I figured it out just from us going for hikes, was the fact that that was the way I separated loving my husband and not tolerating his behavior. Because before that, I was really, really confused. Like, to love him, he had to behave a certain way. Like, I couldn't separate that in my mind. And a boundary meant that I could say, I love you, I care about you, and when you're 30 days sober, I'll help you. Like, loving him didn't mean I had to help him. Does that make sense?
yeah, and I also think when you set a boundary and you go over it, you keep going over it, the thing that propels you over it is you keep thinking you're dealing with a different person than you're dealing with, or different. I always look at, I separate the disease from the person. I always, when they're actively addicted, you're dealing with the addiction and not the person. But you keep thinking that they're gonna, like, I didn't leave, or it took me 4 times to leave my husband because I kept believing in this dream that he was who I thought he was, and that we had a family, and that I couldn't leave him because I couldn't make my son not have a father. And that was just like a dream world that didn't exist, but you hang on to that because it's what you saw and what you know or what you think you need to do.
Yeah,
Instead of go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, and then I feel like society doesn't help you
Mm-mm.
set boundaries. Like if I was married to an addict, everybody was telling me I needed to work to save him.
Mhm.
And so to me that blurred the line that I couldn't set a boundary. Like I couldn't say like you say this all the time, like my helping him was not helping him. Like
Mm-mm.
if sacrificing my life would have made him quit drinking, then by all means keep doing it if that's what I want. But everything I was doing by not setting boundaries was fueling his
Mhm.
addiction. It wasn't helping his addiction. But I felt like the reason I think this show is so important about boundaries is I think they're very confusing.
Mhm.
The people who love us don't understand them because I felt like once I set boundaries, I got very judged for those,
Oh, yes.
very judged. Like
Yeah.
I had a dime for every time somebody said, "Well, couldn't you save your husband?" And I thought, "What the hell do you think I've been trying to do?" Like, you know, uh,
Or people would tell me, "You're married, you took a vow. You knew
yeah,
who he was when you married him. You took a vow, you took a vow."
yeah,
And it took a lot to like go, "Well, yeah, but he's not holding up his end of the." I mean, there's not another person in this relationship. I'm here
yeah,
all by myself. And
right.
worse than that, I'm digging this hole that if he did get better, we would be broke and I would be a miserable enabler. And like you said, we just weren't helping anyone. I mean, I
Yeah.
look to our parents' story. I look to our father who was an enabler and then became a alcoholic himself, and he didn't draw any boundaries. So, do you want to tell that story or do you want me to?
I think you should tell the story.
Okay, so when my parents were first married, they were supposed to live in New York State, which my mother really wanted to, and that's the kind of girl he married, and he should have done that. So they settled in White Plains, and he got a call from his mother, and she said, "You have to come back. You have to come back. Your father is terrible, and I can't live like this." And our father took our mother to live in a coal town in Western Pennsylvania, which where
Actually,
he was
there's
from.
there's one thing I want to interject there because I think it's important. So our grandmother didn't set a
Mm,
boundary, and the first thing our mother and father did was asked her to come
correct.
and live with them,
That's right.
and she wouldn't do it.
Mhm.
So then they didn't set a boundary.
Right, right, and that was really important because, my mother loved her mother-in-law, and she would have loved for her to come up there, and that would have left Buck, our grandfather, on his own, which would have been fine, and, but they changed their lives to enable her, and then they came down there, and Buck continued in his behavior, and the enabling continued supporting him. Our father took over his business instead of doing what he loved, which was being an actuary, and the enabling just kept on. And we have to think like how different would our lives have been if everybody wouldn't have given into that boundary, if they would have kept their boundary and stayed in New York and lived the life they wanted to live. I mean, our mother was angry at our father from that day forward. And they were what, 2 years married at that point? She hated our town. And that negativity flew into all of us all the time. And daddy ended up becoming an alcoholic.
Yeah, which happens a lot to
Mhm.
enablers if you don't establish the boundary. So like really think about that. Like think about the fact that my my grandmother wouldn't set a boundary. So then she demanded that her son not set a
Mhm.
boundary. Son turned around to the woman that he had just pledged and was deeply in love with and did not set a boundary.
Mhm.
Our mother did not set
No,
a boundary.
that's what we
And
learned.
and down the hole everybody went because nobody was willing to set a boundary. And the whole idea is you think like, I can't let the other person suffer.
Mhm.
But the truth is, because nobody wanted my grandfather to suffer, six of us, seven of us ended up suffering. And
And it
and
didn't alleviate his suffering
at all. No,
at
like,
all.
yeah, nobody. Whereas if we'd have set a boundary, because now I want to tell a story where you and I set a boundary that I think was turned a lot of things around. I feel like when you had your son, you did so many things right in breaking that cycle. Like even in the boundary that you set between your son and his father, in the sense that I always remember you saying, he loves you to the best of his ability. He cares about you. He loves you, but he's suffering with his own disease and doesn't have the ability to love. Like, you explained it so well so that your son didn't feel rejected, and he understood where that boundary was and why you weren't living with
And
him
also, if
anymore.
his father had been in his right mind, he never ever would want to hurt him. Never
Right,
would want to hurt him. So it wasn't safe to go with him. And it's
right.
not because he didn't love him, it's because it wasn't safe, and we have to protect your dad and not let him hurt you in any way.
Yeah. And so then our mother, who was not good at setting
Yeah.
boundaries at all, once our father died and our brothers started to get sick, she had no boundary with our brothers. She took the money and tried to save them. She did everything, trying to save them, enable them. And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I remember when our second brother, Ted, was in really big trouble, and I went to Washington, D.C. with her. And I told her this would be the last time I would go with her to try to save Ted. And she agreed that it would be the
Mhm.
last time, not thinking that she ever thought that I was serious. But not long after that, she brought Ted to live with her because, of course, our enabling didn't work. And you and I laid the boundary that we loved her, we cared about her, and she was welcome in our homes, but we were not going to go to her home if Ted was there and she
Mhm.
was enabling that. And she got really, really mad at us. I mean, really mad at us. And I think that's the important thing to note, that when you do draw a boundary, expect resistance.
Mhm. Mhm. Not only that, but we told her that we wouldn't be she wanted to make her will the 3 of us, and we said, "No, it was either gonna be you or if he was gonna be on it, we weren't gonna be on it." So the
Yep.
choice was to make you the executor just because it was easy, and I didn't care.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, yeah, and she got
Well,
mad about that.
Well, I think that's the other thing too, is that when you set boundaries, you have to live with the own consequences of the
Mhm.
boundary. Now, our
Mhm.
mother was going through all the money, so there wasn't going to be any money there anyway.
No, no.
But assume with the fact that,
Well,
you
Teddy was
know,
going through the money, not our
yeah,
mother. Yeah,
that's
was
true.
stealing from her.
Um, but but imagine the fact that you have to be willing to say, I don't want to live like this, and no
Yes,
amount of money or anything is
yes.
worth it. And we had to be willing for our mother to be angry with us for laying that boundary.
Mhm. Now that was a really strong boundary. We were kinda, like, in our strong period of our journey, but I think it's really important to go back. In the beginning, the boundaries are can be smaller. Like,
Yeah,
you just need to do what you need to do to get through the day. And
yeah.
I think a really good example of that is you renting that apartment for Doug.
Yeah, yeah, and I'll tell that story, is
Yeah.
that, I mean, because then the boundaries start to work the other way, right? Like, you finally get the courage to do what you need to do, and the advice you're getting is that you need to live your life, you can't save the addict.
Mhm.
And I was doing really, really well with that, and Doug and I had separated. I caught him in a moment of sobriety and gotten him to sign,
Mhm.
separation
Mhm.
papers, and, I'd given him every penny we had, which wasn't a ton, but, you know, anyway, uh, and he wound up on the street. He wound up in homeless shelters. He wound up in the hospital, and I couldn't take it. Like, I would get phone calls from him that he'd been beaten up on the streets of Greenville, South Carolina. I would get phone calls from him that he was in jail somewhere, and I didn't want him living with me. And my therapist was saying, draw the boundary, draw the
Mhm.
boundary, draw the boundary. Well, finally, what I had to do was put him in an apartment because I needed him to be safe for me,
Mhm.
not for him. I
Yeah.
don't even know how much he stayed in that apartment. It wasn't like he stopped drinking or he stopped getting beaten up on the street, or none of that stopped. But I felt better because at least I was doing something. But I needed to understand that enabling was for me. I
Mhm.
had no expectation of him getting better.
Yeah. And that is healthy and good, and that just shows you the difference between like, if you had done that 3 years before, you would have been
Oh,
like, "Why aren't you staying in the apartment? And why are you still drinking? And I'm doing it," and you didn't do it with that attitude at all. You were saying, "This is something I need for me. I need to rent this thing. This is my boundary I'm setting for me. I can't take the on the street. So this is what I'm doing. But I'm doing it for me and not him with that expectation."
so how do you think we got there? Like I'm thinking about like a boundary, and I'm thinking like I was so clear in my head that I was going to pay for this apartment, that he wasn't probably going to live in it much. It was money down the drain, and he wasn't going to get sober. And there was no amount of anger in me at all about that. And I think about like where I started. How
Mhm.
how do you think you get good at boundaries?
Well, I think it's an evolution.
Mhm.
I think you try not to judge yourself too much. I think that's like you go to these places and, oh, you can't help the addict. You can't do anything about it. You can't da 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 da. And and then you almost feel guilty for any kind of help that you give. You feel like, oh my gosh, I'm hurting them. I'm hurting them. Just like we said, enabling is feeding the addiction. But at some point you do have to live and you do have to manage. Back to that question, to draw the boundary. What can I live with? What can I not live with? And then the other part of that, Meredith, is like you took the expectation off of Doug, which
Yeah.
we'll talk about in a future podcast. Like the addiction is what the addiction is. And it's very predictable, and you're not going to change it. So you need to change yourself. You
Yeah,
know,
I think I don't know if I read this or made it up in my own head, but I think one of the most powerful things for me was to start to realize that it was as hard for me to stop enabling him
mm-hmm,
as it was for him to quit
mm-hmm.
drinking. And that when I would get the urge to enable him, I would think to myself, if I expect him to quit drinking, I've got to begin by stopping enabling and really lay in how uncomfortable that struggle is.
Well, I do probably think a lot of us getting better at boundaries was realizing that we had a problem,
Mhm.
that we personally
Yeah.
had a problem,
Yeah.
that was beyond the addiction. And it's a place I still spin in when I get anxious or when life gets out of control a little bit. I go back into that control mode for sure. It's
Yeah.
never really left me. But
No,
the
I
thing is being
yeah.
aware of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you should read the passage from the guy you were listening to in the New
Okay.
York Times. I
So
think this is really good.
this is from I was listening to the New York Times interview this weekend. It's in the paper, but they also do a podcast on the Daily on Sunday. And this guy Terry Real, who's a family therapist, was on it, and he was talking about depression, but this is the same for anything in a family, any kind of trauma in a family. And he said that family dysfunction rolls down from generation to generation like a fire in the woods, taking down everything in its path until one person in one generation has the courage to turn and face the flames. That person brings peace to their ancestors and spares the children who follow. I think the person who, when you have a family that has addiction, when you're the person who turns to face the flame, you bring peace to your ancestors and you bring peace, spare the children. I mean, our story is that it just kept hot. And I think our story is a common story,
I do
just keeps
too.
hopping from generation to generation to generation. That really hit me because I do feel like, we were the two people in our family that turned to face the flame.
Mhm.
And I believe our next generation will be even better at facing the flame than we were. But,
Right. But you get so much pushback for facing the flame. I mean, it's
yeah,
really with as prominent an understanding that the problem that addiction is, the pushback you get for saying I'm not going to live this way anymore is so strong. I mean, again, the biggest question I get asked when people find out that I'm widowed is, couldn't you have saved him? Like it was my responsibility
yeah.
to save him.
Or
It's just
like you didn't do anything or you never tried.
exactly,
Oh,
exactly.
that's a good idea. I didn't try that.
Yeah, yeah. Like again, when you start to change, you make everything uncomfortable. I think the hardest thing about setting boundaries is how angry your addict gets at you,
Yeah.
because they have become so dependent upon that enabling. And as much as they're arguing with you to get a life, to get out of their business and everything, they don't want you to, because you're
Yeah.
paying their bills, you're taking care of them. And that can be a mind screw.
Well, I think that's where you have to have support.
Yeah.
Like, Al-Anon is free and it's there, and some groups are better than others. So hop around and find your people in that, get therapy, find other friends who are living with addiction. And my thing there is all you have to do is open your mouth
Yeah.
and other people will come to you. Like when our brother committed suicide, by that time, we'd lost so many. I didn't say, but I cannot count the number of people who came up to me and said, we have addiction in our family. We have addiction in our family,
Yeah.
And so you need support, and you need support from other people who understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And you really need to work on really defining what it is that you want, the life that you want,
Mm-hmm.
and setting a small boundary to get there. Like you said, I think that's such good advice. Like, it doesn't need to be huge. It can even be like, he or she is drunk at dinner every night or high every night at dinner, so I'm not going to have dinner with you anymore.
Yeah.
It can be as tiny as that. Or maybe you have a relative that is high all the time at holidays. Well, you don't want to miss every holiday with the family, but maybe you're going to go away for your own Thanksgiving just because Christmas is going to be a disaster because that person. It doesn't have to be black and white. It's a small journey of setting steps of boundaries.
And it's like, you think there are all these rules. Like, over Christmas, we used to get a lot of people would ask us, like, well, how can I not invite so and so to Christmas dinner? I'm like, you just don't invite them.
Right.
You just don't. And if your mother gets mad at you and decides she's not going to come because you're not inviting your brother, which was our case, then she doesn't come. But you set your boundary there. And to live the life you want to live, and to not live in this false hope that your uncle or your brother or your dad is going to show up to be somebody different. Because if you do invite them, don't judge them for what they bring to the table, because they are who they are.
I think something that goes with a lack of boundaries is the need to be a martyr.
Mm-hmm.
I see this a lot. Like, there's a dopamine hit for being the martyr, for being the one that, well, I know, they're always drunk at the holidays, so I'll just invite them and I'll make sure everybody has a good time and I'll take care of it. And constantly, woe is me, rather than making decisions that are right for you.
Yeah. And the whole fact that you ruin everyone else's holiday too.
Yeah.
I just couldn't see a future with my child growing up like that. I just didn't want that for him.
Well, because it would repeat the process.
Oh,
right?
it would definitely repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say anything you want to say, but especially children are watching your actions. I mean, it's exactly what we did with our mother and our father, is that, I mean, I think we learned from our mother, it was fine to be angry about your life, but do nothing to change it. And I don't mean to disparage her. She was an amazing woman, but that was the truth, is that it was like, well, this is the hand that you had been dealt. So you just have to deal with it, and you just have to take it. And therefore the addicts end up ruling your life, which again would be fine if they got better, but they do not get better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're not even saying they're a bad person.
No.
Because our dad was not a bad person. He was a real sweetie. And my husband was a sweetie, and so was yours.
Yeah.
But you're not helping.
Yeah. And I think for me, the greatest gift of setting a boundary was when they found Doug dead in a flea bag motel room. He had a note from me beside his bed that I had written to him. And it was, the last couple lines in it were, I love you, I care about you, and if you're 30 days sober, know I'm always here, which in the last 6 months to a year of his life was always the way we ended every conversation, was, I love you, I care about you, and if you're 30 days sober, I'll help you out. And he couldn't get there, but it took away the anger out of me. And I think I would have felt very differently if the last few conversations we would have had would have been angry and hate filled.
And it also put the responsibility on him, which is where it belonged, because you couldn't do anything about it anyway.
Yeah. So what's your biggest piece of advice from this episode? What do you want people to walk away with? What do you want them to think about? And what do you want them to do?
I would want them to get support, because these things are not easy. Like as you said, like, I don't know, how do we come up with this? All this is an evolution. And so I would want them to get support. I would want them to know it's an evolution, and I would want them to know they have a right to their own life. Yeah. They have a right to their happiness, that they matter, which I think is what we said in the last one, which I think is one of the hardest things to get through the head of an enabler. And personally, that didn't get through my head. The reason I left Edward and was able to start down this journey, was my hope was that he would get better and we'd live next door to each other again. I realized that there wouldn't be anything left if I didn't get going. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
I would say my biggest piece of advice is I love that idea of really focusing on the fact that you matter.
Mhm.
And my biggest piece of advice from this episode is to set a small boundary. It
Mhm.
doesn't have to be big, but think about one thing that you would want to be different and lay the boundary down there. And remember that the lack of setting boundaries hurts everyone.
Mhm.
And it does not, the things that you're doing are not going to save your addict anyway. It's not going to get better. So learn to set a boundary, take this step, step by step. So any thoughts on next episode?
Yes. I'm prepared this time. Yeah, I think we're just going to sort of continue in this conversation and we're going to get really pointed about detachment, because I think that confuses everybody, and that leads into helping you set boundaries and everything else. But I think people get almost angry. I know I did in the beginning with detachment, and they really don't understand it. So I think we'll have a discussion on that, if that's okay with you.
I love that. I think that's a great subject. All right, go
Okay.
forward, set a boundary, learn to take care of yourself. We'll see you right back here next week. And next episode, we're going to be talking about detachment. See you then.
Bye.